Now, for those of you who are just listening to the podcast, you won't be able to recognize this, but if you've been happening to watch the YouTube videos, you'll see I'm in a different location, different background. We're going to be working on some of the background here, but this is in my house. And so just a word of warning that I do have 4 small children in my home. And so if you happen to hear any loud thuds or, huge cries or anything, we're just going to hope for the best out there, and I'll try to keep going with these studies. But I appreciate you sticking with this study, and I hope you've been enjoying our walk through Kings, some of my favorite books. And we just went through one of my favorite stories, if not my favorite story, in all of the books of Kings, maybe in the whole Old Testament. So now we're in 2 Kings chapter 8. And I just want to remind us of where we are, right? In the books of Kings, you've got the north, Israel, the south, Judah. The north is always bad. You find out from the very beginning that the northern kingdom is headed for complete destruction. Even when their first king is still on the throne, Jeroboam, because of the false worship, the golden calves that they worship, they're not going to last. And so you see one dynasty after another coming and going until you get to Ahab, the worst of all the kings in the north. He is on the throne for a long time, and his sons are on the throne for a long time. But we know by this point his dynasty is headed for destruction and his family is headed for extermination. This is what we know about the north. And like often happens in the books of Kings, at that point, the author will then take you down south and will say, and I want you to see something happening in the south because I want you to see it in light of what's happening up in the north. So you come to 2 Kings chapter 8 and look down at verse 16. It's one of these texts, that are hard for us to follow because there's a lot of names. But the basic gist of what it says is, while this stuff was going up in the north when Joram, the son of Ahab, was king, down south, a new king from David's line began to reign. His name was Jehoram. He was 32 years old when he began to reign. He reigned for 8 years, but here's what I want you to see. 2 Kings 8, verse 18. The author says, and this guy down south, the one from David's line, walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done. This is not the north, this is the south. The southern king is walking in the same ways as the northern kings, even in the ways of Ahab. But then look at what it says, it's worse. It says, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. You see it? This is the Davidic line where all hope in the Bible is centered. It's on the line of David, the sons of David. There is no other hope for the world outside of the sons of David. And the author wants you to see down south, things are just as bad as they are up north. In fact, as one of my friends said, the house of David is becoming the house of Ahab. Spiritually, the house of David is walking in the ways of Ahab. And now even physically, the house of David is intermarrying with the house of Ahab. And it raises the question again for us. If the northern kingdom is headed for destruction, if the line of Ahab is headed for extermination, and the southern kings are just as bad, and even have intermarried into the line of Ahab, then what does that mean for the southern kingdom? What does that mean for the sons of David? Is God going to destroy the Davidic line? And then you read 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 19, and the author always wants to tell you this. Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. Why not? Not because of any good in them, but rather for the sake of David, his servant, since he promised to give David a lamp and to keep his sons on the throne forever. And here you have the story of the books of Kings, right? That the kings are failures on the whole. Sometimes you have a good one in the south. But at the end of the day, God does not keep the sons of David on the throne because they're worthy, but rather because of his mercy and because of his faithfulness to his covenantal promises. He covenanted himself to David that he would do this, and he is keeping his word. He always keeps his word. Now, You go back up north in 2 Kings chapter 9. Remember, Elisha the prophet is up there. He tells one of his guys, one of the younger men, go up and find this guy, a commander named Jehu. And I want you to anoint Jehu and tell Jehu he's going to be the next king over Israel. And you read about this in 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 through 10. And Jehu's given a very specific mission. He's anointed to be the next king, but he's also anointed so that he will go out and carry out God's judgment on the house of Ahab. Kind of like how Israel, remember when they first came into the land, they were God's instruments to destroy the people of Canaan for all their sins. Now, Elisha gives the words through his young man to Jehu, you have been anointed by God to carry out God's judgment on the house of Ahab and on Jezebel. And the house needs to be exterminated. And there's these reminders about how Jezebel will not be buried. The dogs are going to eat her. They are destined for destruction. So what's Jehu going to do? Well, if you read through this is some of the most intense stories in the books of Kings. It is about Jehu's slaughterhouse. It's one of the most intense killing sprees ever recorded. He goes, he finds Ahab's descendant Joram. He kills him. But Joram is actually with the southern king too at the time. And so he also kills the southern king, which maybe he shouldn't have done. That was David's son, David's line. Ahaziah, he kills him because Ahaziah is wicked too. So now you've got both the northern king and the southern king have been killed by Jehu. But Jehu's not done. He's got to go find Jezebel. So he chases after her. She's looking down at him from a high window and is talking with him. And Jehu looks up into the house and he says, who's on my side up there? Some guys look down and they kind of give him a little wink to let him know they're on his side. And so Jehu has them throw Jezebel out the window. And they throw her out and her blood spatters on the wall and on the horses. And then what does Jehu do? He goes in and he has a meal. And he gets something to drink. And after he goes in and he's been in there for a while, he's like, you know what? She was the queen. Somebody should probably go out there and try to, bury her or something. But when they go out there, they can't find her. Why not? 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 35. When they went to bury Jezebel, this horribly wicked lady, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And when they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord. This is what Elijah said years ago would happen to Jezebel. No one would be able to recognize even where she was. She would not be buried. God had promised this many, many years before through Elijah. It had finally come to pass. And you think, man, this guy Jehu is killing everybody. I mean, he's killing Ahab's line. He's killing Jezebel. He even killed the southern king down in Judah. But it's far from over. Jehu gathers the sons of Ahab, goes after them, 70 sons of Ahab. He kills them all. Then he tries to get the prophets of Baal. And you read through the story and he says, hey guys, I want to meet with all of you prophets of Baal that are left out here because Ahab served Baal a little. I want to serve him a lot. And we're like, what? This guy, I thought he was kind of doing God's will here. He's going to serve Baal? He says, I want every single prophet of Baal with me because we're going to serve Baal because Baal's awesome. And you're like, man, what's going on? He gathers all the sons of Baal, turns on them, slaughters every single one of them. Jehu is just killing everybody. They demolished the pillar of Baal. They demolished the house of Baal. And they made it a latrine. They made it like a toilet. They made it, like a bathroom. And Jehu wiped out Baal worship from Israel, from the northern kingdom. And this is like, I've never seen anybody like this in the northern kingdom who actually is like doing the will of God, getting rid of Baal worship, executing God's judgment on the people. And then he even turns Baal's house into, a bathroom. And that's pretty cool, right? And maybe it even reminds us of that story. Remember when Elijah was against the prophets of Baal years before this? And he's like, hey, you guys, maybe Baal's out in the bathroom. And, what happens to Baal's house in the end? It ends up being a bathroom. God can take false gods and he can mock them because they are nothing against him. And for the first time in Israel's history, we're like, maybe there's a little hope for the northern kingdom. Because Jehu is now going to be the king. He seems to actually obey the word of the Lord. And then you read 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 29, and it's like the nail in the coffin. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is the golden calves. See, another kingdom, another dynasty in the northern kingdom has bit the dust. If you have a little bit of hope in Jehu, but in the end, he can't get away from the sins of the very first king of Israel, the northern kingdom of Jeroboam, the golden calves. No matter how good it looks in the northern kingdom, they are headed for destruction, and they're headed there now in a hurry.